Hello there, welcome once again to our science lesson. Now we have been exploring body systems as our chapter 1. So in our chapter 1, mainly we dealt with body systems. So before we move to the next chapter, we can just do a run through the chapter. We have looked at the body systems, but we have already found out that it is the cells, the tissues and organs that usually come together to form body systems. Body systems usually carry out several functions according to the type of the body system. But we said that for these body systems to function properly, then they have to require other components. We called them as requirements of life. You can recall that for us to live, or for our bodies to perform their normal functions, we need some requirements. Inclusive, water is the major important one, and then we have others like nutrients. We also have very important one that should come together with nutrients. We have oxygen. We know that nutrients, for example, if it is glucose, it's going to be broken down in presence of oxygen in respiratory system to release energy. Water is important because it's a medium that is going to enable various functions to be carried out. But as the process of respiration and other biological processes are being carried out in the body, they usually release of waste metabolic products. So another requirement of life, we also mentioned removal of wastes. Removal of waste metabolic products. Now, after looking at the requirements of life, we said that these systems, body systems, independently are supposed to work together. Systems working together. Systems working together. So we cannot have independent body systems working on its own. For instance, we have digestive system that usually works together with excretory system, because after digestion of food materials, they'll be absorbed into the cells or into the bloodstream. It will go to cells and tissues where respiration will take place and other function will take place, but there'll be formation of waste metabolic products. So an excretory system will come in to eliminate the waste metabolic products. So the systems are working together. Digestive system is working together with excretory system. But again, you can also find a link between digestive system and respiratory system. After carbohydrates have been digested in our body systems, it will be absorbed into the bloodstream. In the bloodstream, it will go to the cells where respiration takes place. So there's a link between digestive system and respiratory system. It is the glucose that's coming from digestive system to now drive a respiratory system in the cells. Again, we can also link with other like nervous system. When you see food, the digestive system is going to react. How is it going to react? Through the nervous system. You have seen food or you have smelled food, that is the nervous system. And together with the endocrine system, you are going to have hormones like insulin being involved to regulate sugar that has come from the digestive system. So systems must always work together to enable proper functioning of the body. But again, as the functioning of body continues, we realize that sometimes we might have how the systems are going to respond to these changes. For example, when you are thirsty, how do you respond to that? You'll seek for water. When it is very hot, how do you respond to that? You are either going to remove your jacket or you find a water bath so that to cool your body. So we also found out that body system usually produce responses. We have responses. We were able to find out different kind of responses. Remember the reflex responses. If, for instance, somebody tries to blow into your face, the first thing that you'll do is to close your eyes. That is a reflex. When you touch a hot object, you are not going to continually touch that hot object. It's going to burn your hand. So the best thing to do is to withdraw your hand from that hot object. That is a reflex. It is a response. So we were able to find out that we have reflex responses, quick automatic responses to changes in the stimuli. And then we also have those responses that you learn. For instance, riding a bicycle. You cannot just be born today, you grow into some few years, and then you start riding your bicycle. You need to learn. We call that one as conditioned responses. Conditioned responses. Conditioned responses. But there's something, again, that we learned about these body systems. Even if it is provided with all requirements of life, the systems are working together in a synchronized manner, and responses are up to date. Sometimes your body will not work properly. When your body is not working properly, is maybe due to a disease. So some of the changes that occur in the body systems are due to diseases. But we also noted that most of the diseases are caused by microorganisms. So microorganisms are the one responsible for some of the changes that occur in our body systems such that it does not work properly. So some of the prominent changes in the body that leads to body systems not working properly, we were calling those changes as diseases. We defined disease as that condition when the body is not working properly. So we came up with different type of diseases. We have what you call infectious diseases and non-infectious diseases. Under infectious diseases, we were able to find out that most of those diseases are caused by pathogens. Infectious diseases. They are caused by pathogens. And because of that, you realize that this disease can be transmitted from one individual to another because of transmission of those pathogens. We were able to find out several kinds of pathogens. Pathogens. We said a pathogen is a disease-causing agent. And if it is living, then it qualifies to be a pathogen. Living disease-causing agents are called pathogens. We were able to find out several types or kinds of pathogens. Okay. Yeah, that one is okay. So you may recall some of the pathogens that we mentioned. We said some pathogens are bacterial. For example, we have Salmonella typhi, which causes typhoid. Some pathogens are fungal or fungi, the one that causes foot rot. Some are viruses. For instance, HIV/AIDS, which is caused by human immunodeficiency virus. And then others are caused by protozoans. Protozoans. A very good example that has been studied a lot in the laboratories, we gave an example of Plasmodium, since it is the one that causes malaria, a very serious tropical disease, malaria. So these are the pathogens. They cause infectious diseases. But in our last lesson now, as we were looking at it, we looked at infectious, non-infectious disease. These are diseases that are caused by other factors apart from pathogens. And we are able to group them into three. We said, if you can recall properly, we had genetic diseases. Genetic diseases. We can highlight them properly on the whiteboard. Non-infectious diseases. Non-infectious diseases. We mentioned one, genetic diseases. You can recall that genetic diseases are those diseases that are caused by abnormalities in one or more genes. If we have some genes that are abnormal, either we have deletion, we have addition, we have duplication, we can have genetic diseases. So genes, gene abnormality. We also said that apart from gene, we have chromosomal numbers being incorrect chromosomes. So genetic diseases can also be caused by an effect on chromosomes, incorrect number. If we are going to have incorrect number of chromosomes, we are able to find out how that one can come about, either due to you have looked at stages of meiosis, when there is no separation of homologous chromosomes. Some of the cells will have more number of chromosomes, while the other cells will have less number of chromosomes, leading to conditions like trisomic condition and monosomic conditions. And then we also looked at other causes like mutagens. Those physical and chemical agents that usually causes mutations in the DNA. They bring about mutations in DNA. Mutations in DNA. And some of the physical and chemical factors that we looked at included high energy radiations, we have some drugs, we have some chemicals, and also some viruses are classified as mutagens. The other one, another category of those diseases, we're able to mention some examples, so we can just briefly go through them as examples. We looked at Down syndrome, Turner syndrome, sickle cell anemia, and so many others like hemophilia and cystic fibrosis. The other category, nutritional diseases. Nutritional diseases. Here in summary, we simply said, if for example our diet is going to have excess or limited supply of given component of a diet, it can lead to nutritional disease. If there's excess, for instance, excess fats, it will lead to obesity. If we have deficiency, in fact, this is where most of the nutritional diseases come in. You are going to experience diseases like scurvy, lack of vitamin C. Others, very common in the tropics, rickets. Others, like again, in the tropics where there is less supply of food, and especially proteins, kwashiorkor, and the rest. Then the last category was environmental diseases. So we said for environmental diseases are those diseases that are caused by factors that happen in the environment. Like, for example, metal poisoning. So, for instance, if the waterways, clean waterways are going to be contaminated by mercury, by lead, by heavy metals like bismuth, like thallium, then it causes metal poisoning. Others, environmental diseases, are related to chemicals such as drugs, medical drugs. For instance, if you take drugs out of prescription of the doctor, it becomes you're going to develop diseases, maybe too much of the drug or too less of the drug. So we have that, and then we have socially legal drugs. Socially legal drugs include alcohol. If you consume excess of alcohol, it can lead to some of the diseases like blindness, because some of the types of alcohol has high concentration of methanol, and methanol has an effect on eyesight. We also have like caffeine. Caffeine is consumed as a stimulant, but if you use it over time, it creates addiction. And then other chemicals available or commercially available, useful chemicals. For instance, petrol. Petrol is supposed to be a fuel to power engines, but some people do sniff the same. Glue is supposed to be an adhesive, but now some people also sniff it. So this was our last bit of our chapter. So I think in that chapter you enjoyed every bit of it. There's always some questions at the end of most of the textbooks that you'll find in the library and also on the e-library, that is on the internet. So because of this, it gives us a reason to look at the next chapter, chapter 2. So having looked at the body systems, how they function, the requirements of the body systems, then now as our organism is able to function, how is it going to live in its environment or in its ecosystem? And we have some factors in the ecosystem that can affect the population of that organism. So our chapter number 2 is on communities and environment. Communities and environment. So in this chapter we shall try to define or to find out different type of communities that exist in different ecosystems, communities that exist in different ecosystems, and then also try to find out, do we have some factors in the environment that usually affect the size of communities. Now, before we even go further, we may just interrogate the headline, community and environment. So what is a community? What is a community? Now, where you are living is a community because you have different types of people that are living in that area. So you form a community. Now, to get this example or the definition very well, I want us to shift our mind to the park. Let us go to the park. If you go to the game park, you are not going to find just one type of animal, especially the parks that exist in the tropics of Africa. You realize that, for example, in Kenya, there's a very famous national park called Masai Mara National Park or Tsavo National Park. In the park, you will find animals like elephants. We have elephants. You will get zebras. You'll get buffaloes and several others. Even in the community of the cat, in the group of the cat, like lions. So all this in that game reserve, shall be referred to as a community. So elephant belong to a different species, zebra a different species, buffalo different species, lion different species, but they are found in the same place. The place being the game reserve. So if they are going to be found in the same place, the game reserve, then we shall say that one is a community. So by definition, we can define a community as a group of organisms of different species. Is a group of organisms of different species that either exist or live in the same environment, or you can use a better scientific term, habitat. If they are going to be found in the same habitat is an equivalent of a home with all set conditions for survival of these organisms, which means in this game reserve we have all the conditions for survival of elephants, zebra, buffalo, and lions. We call that one as a habitat. So our definition, let it be very clear, because we shall use the word community very many times in our chapter or in our lessons until the end of the chapter. A group of organisms of different species that live in the same habitat. That habitat could be a game reserve. We could even use a different habitat like water habitat or a water ecosystem. In water, we will find so many different types of animals and even plants. So I think that one is very clear. Community. Now let us look at environment, meaning of environment. Environment. What is what's the meaning of environment? Now, wherever you are right now, if you are in a library, if you are in a classroom, in a room somewhere, listening to me, that is your environment. Now, in that environment, it could be either there is somebody there, or you have come with your pets. You have your cat, you have your dog around you. That is an example of a living organism that is around you. But again, we also have other features in that room or in that library. It could be a chair, it could be a table, it could be a seat, or something different, like a fridge. That is a physical environment, non-living. So we have the living and living part within the same place. That is what we call the environment. So when you talk of environment, is an accumulation of both living and non-living things occurring together, and it usually affects how communities are going to survive. Is the living and non-living surrounding, living and non-living surrounding of an individual. So when you talk of an individual, does not mean that a person. That individual could be any other living thing, living and non-living surrounding of an individual. That individual could be a tree, that individual could be an animal, that individual could be a human being. That is what you call an environment. Now, we are going to have a long haul through this chapter. But before we go to the nitty-gritty of the same topic or a chapter, we shall require the following prerequisite information or knowledge. What we need to know. How much do you know or remember about communities and environment? This is not the first time you are coming across the topic. You have come across the topic even from the lower primary level. But now, at each level, it is an expanded topic, including new, more concepts and facts. Prerequisite information. Prerequisite knowledge. Now, for us to assess what we know or what we can remember, we are going to use a series of questions before we get to the main topic. So some of the questions include: what is a food chain? What is a food chain? You have come across the term food chain, a food chain. Now, when you talk of a food chain, it's simply a feeding relationship showing flow of energy from one trophic level to another in a linear manner. Is a feeding relationship. Showing flow of energy and matter. Flow of energy and matter from one trophic level, to another. From one trophic level to another in a linear manner or linearly. We can substitute this one with linearly. I want us to look at this critically. As you remember, feeding relationship, showing flow of energy and matter from one trophic level to another in a linear manner or linearly. Now, we have said in an environment, we shall have both living and non-living. Sometimes organisms will feed on non-living like water, but most of the time organisms feed on living organisms starting from vegetation to others. So as they feed like that, there's another organism that will feed on it, and another organism that will feed on the other organism. So in the process, it will be allowing flow of matter. Now, what is matter in science, and specifically relating to communities and environment? Matter refers to mainly nutrients. Nutrients. For instance, carbon. Carbon is an example of a nutrient. Nitrogen is an example of a nutrient, and several others, phosphorus, sulfur. But these are the major ones that are required in the body. And energy can be in form of ATP if it is going to be stored, or in form of heat. Either ATP or in form of heat. So that feeding relationship will allow flow of energy and matter from one trophic level to another. Another term that we must get, trophic level. Trophic level simply means, as you can remember from your previous lessons, I hope you are told that a trophic level is a feeding level. Feeding level. Trophic level is the same as feeding level. We have different categories of feeding level. If we begin from the lowest feeding level, the lowest feeding level is the producers. Producers, these include green plants. Green plants. Why are they called producers? Because they're able to manufacture their own food from simple inorganic substances in presence of light, and that light is absorbed by green matter that exists in plants. The green matter is called chlorophyll. The other feeding level are consumers. We have different types of consumers, starting from the one that consumes producers, the green plants, and then the one that will consume others, and then like that. So briefly, you can also look at it, consumers. We have what you call primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. Briefly, you can also find out what are the examples. If it was a one-on-one, you could have told me some example of primary consumers. Now, wherever you are, you could be thinking of an example. My example of a primary consumer is this: cow, or a goat, or a sheep, or antelope. Cow. That's an example of a primary consumer. It feeds on grass, the green plants. Secondary consumer, that the one that can feed on a cow, is an example. There are so many. What do you think could feed on a cow, or an antelope, or a goat, or a sheep? Now, from wherever you are, I know you have an answer, and that could be maybe in your mind, or you have said to your friend that we can have hyena. Now, this hyena, again, if it is sick, very weak, or it dies, there is a tertiary consumer. We have very ferocious birds that usually hover around sick animals, or those animals that hunt, like hyenas and lions. A very good example is the vulture. The vulture becomes the tertiary consumer. It can feed on secondary consumer, primary consumer. And then the last feeding level are the decomposers. Decomposers, these are now microorganisms that will act on both producers and consumers, especially when they die. When producers die, when consumers die, then consumers are going to act on these too, so that now it allows recycling of nutrients in the ecosystem. So I think that was a very good catch-up for you, a food chain. The second knowledge we can try to choke our mind with is this. Draw a food chain with at least 4 organisms. Draw a food chain with at least 4 organisms. 4 organisms, beginning with grass. Beginning with grass. Now, we have said the food chain is flow of energy or matter through trophic level in a linear direction. So it will take a linear direction. So if we start with grass, grass is a feeding level, a trophic level, grass. So when you are writing or drawing a food chain, you usually draw an arrow from the source of energy or the source of matter to the direction where you think that energy or matter will be flowing to. In other words, to the eater, the one that eats grass. In our example, we have given a cow. Now, that cow is the source of energy now at that point, or matter. Then we have also said that lion or hyena can feed on a cow. Lion can feed on that cow. So it becomes another consumer. Now, I'll ask a question after this. And then now, when the lion is weak or it dies, it will now be fed on by a vulture. So, this is what you call a food chain. Each of these organisms is representing a trophic level or a feeding level. But now, at each of these organisms is representing a given trophic level. Like grass. What do you think grass is representing? Now, from where you are, I know you have an answer. Grass represents which type of trophic level? It represents producer. So this is the producer. And we have given reason why it should be a producer. It actually produces food. It's able to convert high energy in the solar or in sun into some mechanical or some chemical or mechanical energy that will be stored in the grass. So one that has been stored, it becomes available to the cow when the cow feeds on the grass. The cow represents another feeding level. Now you can also tell me the cow represents a feeding level. Which feeding level? I know you have said primary consumer. Primary consumer. A cow will be fed on by a lion. What is the trophic level for lion? Secondary consumer. Secondary consumer. And then the vulture represents tertiary consumer. The vulture represents tertiary consumer. So this is our food chain. But now we have just tried to explain what does each one of them. So the arrow usually represents the direction of flow of matter and energy. Remember, in our food chain, there are two things that will be flowing. We have energy in form of heat, in form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, And you also have matter flowing. Carbon, those nutrients are also flowing as organisms feed from each other. The other question, number 3. Question 3. What do the arrows in a food chain? What do the arrows in a food chain? What do the arrows in a food chain show? What do they show? So we have already found out the meaning of the arrows. We have said the arrow simply means or shows the direction of flow of matter through the trophic levels. Shows the direction of flow of matter and energy in trophic levels. In trophic levels. So if it is from grass to the cow, it shows that as the cow feeds on grass, it's allowing flow of energy from grass to the cow. So that's very, very simple. Then question number 4. A food web is interconnected feeding relationship. No, the question is differentiate between food web and food chain. Differentiate between food web and food chain. Food chain. Food web and food chain. Now, to get this properly, we can just have, so if we have a food chain, this direction, A, B, C, D, and then we have another food chain, this direction, maybe E, F, G, H. Maybe another one, that direction, like that. And then another one, this direction, X, and then to that point. We shall call this diagram as a food web. So if we have interconnected feeding relationship, they are interconnected, forming a web, several of them. And this one usually exists where we have communities. In a community, we shall have both food chain and a food web. And if that community is rich, when you talk of a rich community, it's where we have high biodiversity. In other words, there are so many animals existing within the same habitat. They're always bound to be a food web. Several interconnected feeding relationship. This one usually is showing flow of energy, but not in a very direct manner. So we can define a food web as an interconnected feeding relationship. Food web is an interconnected feeding. Interconnected feeding relationships. There are many. We have to use the plural, feeding relationships without direct flow. There is no direct flow of energy and matter. So we have several of them interconnected. Food chain, as we have already defined, is a linear flow of energy from one trophic level to another, a linear. So the difference becomes here, there is without direct flow, non-linear, but here is linear. It's a linear flow of energy and matter. Energy and matter through trophic levels. Trophic levels. Remember, we have quoted trophic levels several times, feeding levels. Then question number, another prerequisite knowledge in form of a question 5. Why are microorganisms needed in a food chain and food web? Why are microorganisms needed in a food chain and food web? So the question is asking us to give the role of microorganisms in food chain and food web. Now, as we have looked at our food chain, let us just draw it again. We had grass, we can use this one. We had grass, cow, and then lion, and we had a vulture as the tertiary consumer. So the question is, what will be the role of microorganism in this? Now remember, as grass carries out photosynthesis, some of the energy together with minerals usually mineralize or combine to form the body of the grass, the structure of the grass or green plants. Now not all those components that made grass will flow to the cow. Some will remain here. And then that cow will feed on the grass, but not all matter that was transferred from grass will be transferred to the lion. Some will remain. In fact, a lot will remain in the cow. And then again, some remains in the vulture, and then in the lion, and also in the vulture. So when these 4 organisms die, they are rich in a lot of matter and sometimes energy. But most of the energy is lost. So there's a lot of matter here. In other words, there's a lot of nitrogen, a lot of phosphorus, a lot of sulfur, a lot of carbon existing in all this, even at the time of death. So how will those nutrients get back into the ecosystem? So when the cow dies, grass dies, lion dies, the vulture dies, the decomposer will come in. The microorganisms, they are going to act as decomposers so as to allow recycling of nutrients that were trapped in the bodies of these 2 or these 4 organisms. So one role of microorganisms is to act as decomposers. Act as decomposers. For what purpose? To allow recycling of nutrients in the ecosystem. To allow recycling of nutrients in the ecosystem. To allow recycling of nutrients in the ecosystem. So I hope this point is well understood, that we have a lot of matter that is sticking or that is remaining in grass, cow, lion, vulture, even us, it is being fed on. Remember, cow has bones. Those bones cannot be crushed wholly by the lion. So decomposers will now come in to finish the work. The same to the lion, so as to allow recycling of nutrients in the ecosystem. The other role is this. So our main pointer is decomposers. The other role is this. Some of these microorganisms, like the algae, blue-green algae or the cyanobacteria, are able to carry out photosynthesis. In fact, one of the research points out that especially in aquatic system, we do not have trees, we do not have grass, but we have microorganisms that carry out the major of the photosynthetic synthetic processes that are supposed to fuel the ecosystem. So they also photosynthesize. Some photosynthesize food, carry out photosynthesis. Photosynthesize food. And then now this food will be available for flow through the ecosystem. So keywords: decomposers, carrying out photosynthesis. So they have two major roles: acting as decomposers, acting as photosynthetic organisms to create matter that will now flow through the ecosystem. The other prerequisite knowledge is on this. 6. What is the difference? What is the difference between nitrifying and denitrifying bacteria? What is the difference between nitrifying and denitrifying bacteria? Now, when you talk of nitrification, conversion of free inorganic nitrogen to a complex organic nitrates or nitrogenous compounds. So if you are going to have, like for instance, nitrogenous gas in the atmosphere being converted into nitrates, we call that process as nitrification. But those organisms that will be involved are called nitrifying bacteria. So nitrifying bacteria, organisms that convert inorganic nitrogen that exists in the atmosphere to nitrates and sometimes ammonium compounds. I'll use initials. I know you have already come across these ammonium compounds. So these ammonium compounds will now be available for plants. Plants will now be able to absorb these nitrates and ammonium compounds to form their structures and also to form proteinous material in their bodies. Plants cannot obtain nitrogen directly from the atmosphere. Now, from the knowledge of chemistry, you know that nitrogen makes the largest percentage of component of air in the atmosphere, but plants cannot use nitrogen directly. Instead, it has to be converted into these forms. So that conversion is called denitrification, and whatever that carries out the process is, they are called nitrifying bacteria. Examples, specific examples include Nitrosomonas, Nitrobacter, and Nitrosomonas. We have Nitrobacter and Nitrococcus bacteria. Nitrococcus bacteria, denitrifying bacteria. Now, if a reverse process happens, now, where these nitrogenous compounds are converted into free nitrogen in the atmosphere, we call that one as denitrification. Denitrification, process of converting these nitrates or the nitrogenous compounds into free nitrogen gas that exists in the atmosphere. we call it denitrification. A very good example, we have this one of that bacteria, denitrifying bacteria. So whatever that will be carrying out the process is called denitrifying bacteria. This is a general name, but the exact example, e.g., we have Theobacillus denitrificans. Theobacillus denitrificans. Theobacillus denitrificans. And remember, these are scientific names. When you write them, you have to underline them. Then the other question, I hope you have understood this very clearly. Denitrifying bacteria convert free nitrogen in the atmosphere into nitrates or nitrogenous compounds that are available or that can be utilized by the plants. And that reverse process is called denitrification, and the bacteria involved are called denitrifying bacteria, where there's conversion of nitrogenous compounds that can be available to plants into free nitrogen that now exist in the atmosphere. Seven, distinguish between herbivore, omnivore, and carnivore. So this is a very easy question. Herbivore, you know what it means. In fact, it comes from the word herb. Herb means green plants or vegetation. These are the animals that feed on green matter, feed on green vegetation or vegetation. In simple words, vegetation, feed on vegetation. Very good example we have already given. We gave our example in the food chain. We said cow is an example. The cow is an example. Then we have omnivore. Omnivore feed on the they feed both on meat or beef and vegetation. Now we realize that most of the organisms in the ape family, the ape family are mostly omnivores. A very significant example is the man, carnivore. Carnivore feed on both herbivore and the omnivore. On mainly, because most of them, all of them are made of beef, mainly beef. So if they are feeding on beef, then they feed on both herbivore and omnivores. Both herbivores and omnivores. So that was very easy. Eight. In a food chain, what is a primary consumer? What is a primary, secondary, and tertiary consumer? I think we have come across this one already. We have said the primary consumer is the one that feeds on the producers. We gave examples. Feed on producers. They feed on producers. A very good example that we gave is the cow. Secondary consumer. Secondary consumer is the one that feeds on the primary consumer. Feeds on primary consumer. Primary consumer. In our example, we can vary, for instance, the leopard. Leopard feeding on an antelope or a rabbit. Tertiary consumer. Tertiary consumer is unique. It feeds on both primary and secondary consumer. Primary and secondary consumer. Feeds on both primary and secondary consumer. Our typical example, vulture. Now, if you have ever watched National Geographic films, you have seen how the vulture behaves. Sometimes you can go to the internet and then download some of the videos for the purpose of seeing the behavior of vultures. They'll feed on a cow. If it is weak or if it is dead, they'll feed on a leopard when it is realized that it's sick or it is dead. And sometimes even on themselves, when one of the member is weak or is dead. The other requisite knowledge that we have already come across is an ecosystem. What is an ecosystem? What is an ecosystem? So if we are going to have all living organisms in an environment function together with the physical environment or with the physical factors around it to form what you call an ecological unit, then it becomes an ecosystem. So all living organisms functioning together. So these living organisms are functioning together with the physical environment. Physical environment. To form an ecological unit. To form an ecological unit. Then we shall call it an ecosystem. So in simple terms, let us look at living organisms. And then they are existing in a physical environment. Why? So that they can now function properly, forming an ecological unit. So you realize that this ecosystem is supposed to be self-sustaining, supposed to produce its own food. If it is a fish pond, even a very small pond occurring on a tree or on a certain part of the tree or a hole on the tree, it could be an ecosystem because maybe in that pond, in that small hole, we have algae that's producing food. We have primary consumers in form of organisms like Daphnia. And then we also have secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and all those together with microorganisms, the bacteria, to act as decomposers. That one forms an ecosystem. So again, apart from just defining an ecosystem in that form, we can also say that is a self-sustaining collection of both living and non-living organisms. Is a self-sustaining collection of both living and non-living organisms. Non-living organisms. So the word that catches everything is the catchword is self-sustaining. Self-sustaining means if we are going to have all other ecosystem around it being shut down or being removed, the organisms in that ecosystem shall continue to exist. They shall continue to live. Now, if we may use an example, I've just used an example of a hole on a tree. So if that is a fish pond, this could be an ecosystem, because in this fish pond we have plants, and then these plants shall be fed on, let us say, by slightly smaller insects or organisms like Daphnia, and then we have fish, small fish feeding on Daphnia, and then we have large fish, and then we have a crocodile feeding on large fish. This is a self-sustaining system, so that at the end of it all, if we have some bacteria maybe suspended in this water, any of these organisms dying, plants, Daphnia, fish, small fish, large fish, or crocodile dying, they'll be decomposed to allow recycling of the nutrients. But at the same time, again, we can have all the trophic levels being represented. The trophic level of producer being represented by the plants. Producer represented by plants. Daphnia represented by primary consumers. Fish or small fish being represented by secondary consumers. And large fish or crocodile in the trophic level of tertiary consumers. So in the end, it becomes a self-sustaining collection of both living and non-living organisms. Draw a pyramid of biomass for an ecosystem. Draw a pyramid of biomass in an ecosystem. Now, all of us know the shape of pyramid, but our emphasis is on two words, biomass and ecosystem. We have already identified the meaning of an ecosystem. We have said an ecosystem is a collection of both living and non-living organisms so that they become self-sustaining. Biomass is the dry weight of all living organisms in an ecosystem. So if you are going to look at the trophic levels and then pick organisms, specific organisms from each trophic level and determine the biomass. Maybe producer, trophic level, we determine the mass of grass. Another trophic level, primary consumer, we determine the mass of antelope. Maybe we determine the mass of hyenas and the mass of vultures. It will give us different biomasses. If we do a histogram, horizontal histograms, it will give us a shape that is in form of a pyramid. So that shape, if we begin with the largest histogram, it will represent the producers, which are the grass or vegetation. In this case, we can use an example, grass. The second histogram, that is slightly larger but smaller, will be the primary consumers. And in this case could be the cow or the size of the biomass of a cow. We look at secondary consumer. secondary consumer, in this case hyena or whichever cat family, and then we have the tertiary consumer. Tertiary consumer. In this case, the typical one is the vulture, which is occupying the apex of the pyramid. So if you did a dotted diagram from it, it forms a pyramid. So this is an example of pyramid of biomass. So you obtain the histograms from biomass of each trophic level: producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumers. But you may realize something, that producers, usually their biomass is the largest, followed by primary consumers up to the apex of the all of the trophic of the pyramid of biomass. Why? Because from each trophic level, as the energy is flowing from one trophic level to another, there is loss of energy. Loss of energy is due to several processes like defecation. Now look at primary consumers like elephants. When they feed on grass, they do not have high efficiency of conversion of grass into energy that, or into matter that can be absorbed into their body system. So realize that you'll find twigs in the stool of the elephants, showing that it was not efficient in converting the matter into body tissues or into energy. Respiration is also another process through which this energy may be lost. Remember, respiration, there is heat, and some of the heat is lost from the body by several processes like conduction, convection, and radiation. And then we also have some of the energy being lost through reproduction. You have come across, you have been taught about cell division, mitosis, and meiosis. For cells to divide, before they divide, they go into a stage called interphase. In interphase, there's accumulation of enough energy that will drive the rest of the process. So you realize that some of the energy is being lost. We cannot have 100% transmission of energy from one trophic level to another. So we have several other hint points or clues that we must get to before we look at the rest of the chapter. So I want to welcome you to this chapter. It's a very enjoyable chapter because it talks about our environment. Thank you.